Everybody, how we doing? Good evening. My word, we've got a good one tonight. I tell you now, I'm so looking forward to chatting away with Simon Entwistle. Amazing chap. I saw went to funny enough, I went to Lancashire a couple of weeks ago to see him to talk about the Pendle Witch Trials, and yeah, I'm just gonna let Simon do his thing because honestly, he's just absolutely amazing. I'm gonna bring him in. No dilly dallying. Good evening, Simon.
Good evening, Justin. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so we've got. I mean, we've got a lot of ground to cover because the Pendle Witch Trials is a fascinating area of history, and there's lots of different avenues attached to it and lots of things we can talk about. However, before we start all that, for anybody who hasn't come across you before or hasn't seen you, don't know of you, do you want to say a little bit about yourself, Simon, if you can?
Sure thing, Justin. Um, Basically, I am a tour guide, but I run my own tour guiding business. The vast majority of my tours are ghosts, murders, mysteries, and witches. And over the years, I've amassed a huge amount of knowledge, mainly from Yorkshire, Lancashire, and Cumbria. You never ever run out of material. I love my job because it's something which I really enjoy doing. And there's nothing better than working for yourself, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, I mean, you've been doing this for a fair while now, and you're award winning. And I think everybody who's listening to you this evening will realise why you're award winning, because I certainly did. Because I'd heard about you, or I'd seen little clips of you on TV, but actually sitting there in the pub in the Bay Horse, it was it roughly,
Mm.
listening to you for about an hour, I think it was. I thought, my word, this man can bring history alive. So I'm going to literally just kind of allow you to kind of bring this whole trial to life, really. So to get us started, I think we really, before we start talking about the people involved in the trial and the whys and the wherefores, we're going to go back talk about the religious background and the period of the time in the 17th century was fueled with superstition and religious belief, and a lot of that came from the king and prior to it, from the 15th century as well, really. But there was a lot of superstition and a lot of straight away pointing of fingers, whether that's for religious reasons or, towards people who, before we go into witchcraft. But there's a lot of turmoil at the time, wasn't there? So do you want to say a little bit about the background of what we're talking about here?
Sure, Justin. We are going to turn the clock back to the very, very early parts of the 17th century. And in 1603, we lost Queen Elizabeth I. And many historians believe she was probably our finest ever monarch. Defeated the Spanish Armada 1588, led by example. And when you think this poor woman, her own mother had been beheaded by her own father, she had a lot of responsibilities on her shoulders. When she died in 1603, she felt real remorse what she'd done to her cousin Mary Queen of Scots. Of course, she'd had her beheaded. Now, on her deathbed, she did notice, of course, that she was indeed the Virgin Queen. Someone had to succeed her, and that person was none other than Mary Queen of Scots' son, King James VI of Scotland, who then became King James I of England. Now, this man was absolutely paranoid about witchcraft. He not only believed that witch existed, he believed that witches were out to get him. Now, the king was also an ardent Protestant, and he hated the Catholics with a vengeance. And he believed that Catholicism and witchcraft were indeed aligned. He believed that the gunpowder plot was not only organized by the Catholics, but had witchcraft associated with it. So, on becoming King of England, he wrote a book, which you can buy today from any leading bookshop if you'd like to, called the Demonology Book. And as you pick it up, how to find a witch, how to try a witch, and most importantly, how to eradicate a witch. Now, he gave orders to every magistrate to watch out for illegal Catholic gatherings. Now, there's one area known simply as the Forest of Pendle in Lancashire that was very, very isolated. It was away from society. And living deep in that forest were a group of people that would go down in history as the Pendle Witches. But you're quite right, Justin. All this really started because of King James's paranoia and also a magistrate in the Forest of Pendle waiting in the wings.
And as well, I mean, this was widespread, wasn't it? You know, fueled by the king's thoughts and ideas, and this book, which was very popular at the time. But Lancashire seemed to have been portrayed as quite a wild and lawless area of the country, particularly lawless. Why did it get that? Well, where did it get that reputation from? First of all, why Lancashire particularly?
Well, the area known as the Forest of Pendle was very, very isolated. It was away from society. And living deep in that forest were two very elderly women, Elizabeth Southern, commonly known as Demdike, and Whittle, commonly known as Bessie Chattox. Both women were over 85 years old. They defied the laws of nature because life expectancy would be 35 if you're lucky. Remember, there's no doctors, no surgeons, no hospitals, no supermarkets. You can't just pop out and buy something. You lived off the land. It was very, very tough. Now, these two elderly women were quite capable of fixing broken bones. They could reduce temperatures. They knew all about various plants. And of course, all modern medicines come from various plants. Of course, at that period of time, it would be classed as witchcraft. Now, these two women, Justin, they had no love for each other because both of them would make these herbal remedies to sell to the public. So they'd look at each other as a rival. There was no love whatsoever between them, and that was not going to help their case in the months advancing towards the witch trials of 1612. Shall I continue with the story, Jason, or do you want to ask some more?
Well, absolutely. I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of, I mean, people say a lot about witches, but you know, financially, it was certainly, you know, a way of earning quite a bit of money, really, wasn't it? What do you think? There was a bit of jealousy amongst the other people as well, and a bit of finger pointing going on, do you think?
It would have been so unusual, Jason, to see an elderly woman of that age, 85 years of age, because life expectancy would be 35 for common people living in the area. So they defied the laws of nature. And of course, these herbal remedies were working. Nowadays, we're looking at it as medicine, but in those days, it was looked at as witchcraft, really.
And where did this start from? I mean, so we have two rival families. At what point did it kind of snowball into what became a trial then? Where did the first kind of incidents happen?
Right. We are going to turn the clock back now to March the 18th, 1612, and a cottage on the slopes of Pendle Hill, which sadly now there's only the foundations left. That cottage was called Malkin Tower, which sounds grand, doesn't it, really? But Malkin Tower would have been a one-roomed limestone hovel. Living there was Demdike, her daughter Elizabeth Device, and she had three children, James, Alison, Jeanette, to three different fathers. Living nearby was indeed Anne Whittle, commonly known as Bessie Chattox, in the village of Roughly, with her daughter Anne Redfern. These were the main Pendle witches. No love between these two women whatsoever. But our story starts, Justin, on the 18th of March, 1612, when Alison Device, she is the granddaughter of Demdike, she left the stone cottage Malkin Tower and had a walk along the length of Pendle Hill. She had the misfortune, and it really was misfortune, of meeting a Halifax peddler called John Law. When I say peddler, John Law was basically a walking salesman. A large pack in his back full of 1612 luxuries. He would go to all of those villages like Blacko, Barley, Downham, Roughly, Newchurch, Colne, and Clitheroe, selling his wares. He was also a bit like a walking salesman, and he would give information to each village as he made his way through it. He met young Alison. Alison was dressed in rags, and she begged of him, "Oh, please, sir, you can spare just a couple of pins to pin me clothing together, sir. Get away with you, lass. You got no money. You're no use to me. Please, sir, you can spare just a couple of pins, sir. Get away with you," shouted John Law. According to John Law, the Halifax peddler, out of the mist, out of the heather, appeared a huge black dog with snarling white teeth, glowing red eyes. It had almost like cloven feet and a very, very long tail. The dog sat next to Alison. The dog turned to look at Alison, and the dog talked. "Alison, I can lame him for you." "Lame him! Lame him!" she screamed. John Law felt this terrible pain on his left arm, his left leg, and collapsed beneath the shadow of Pendle Hill, on what we call the Combe to Chawden Road. He lay there, writhing in agony, and the kind people of the market town of Combe could see him. They got a stretcher team together, and they carried him into an old alehouse called the Greyhound Inn in the town of Combe, which is long, long since gone. There the landlord, Jonathan Edrington, spoon-fed him, cleaned him, and as Law's voice returned, he shouted, "I've been cursed! There's a witch in the forest, a young lass with a dog. I swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She talked to it talked to her. She's a witch. Send letters back to my family." A series of letters were sent back to Halifax, and John Law's eldest son, Abraham, received the first letter. "My father's in trouble. I'd better go and collect him." He set off from Halifax, arrived in Combe, and walked into the old Greyhound Inn and saw his father in this twisted and contorted state. "Father, what's happened to you, man? You look terrible." "Abraham, I met a young lass in the forest of Pendle. She had a dog with her. The dog talked to her. She talked to it. She's cursed me. She's a witch. I can't move my left arm. I can't move my left leg. I'm paralysed. I want you, lad, to go and find her, bring her here, reverse the curse." Abraham must have been quite a brave lad. He set off and walked deep into the forest of Pendle with these twisting pathways and found this one-roomed limestone cottage called Malkin Tower. He hammered on the door opened, and there was James Devise, Alison's brother. "Can I help you, shear?" "I want to see Alison Devise. My father wants to see her. Where is she?" "That's my sister, sir. She's in here." Alison came to the door. "Right, lass, you're coming with me," shouted Abraham Law. Against her wishes, against her will, she is dragged down the slopes of Pendle Hill and straight into the old market town of Combe and into the Greyhound Inn, where she made eye contact with John Law, the Halifax peddler. Law looked up from his sickbed and shouted, it's you, you're a witch. You've cursed me, lass. That dog you had, I heard it talk. Admit it, lass." This 14-year-old girl, on bended knees, begged and begged and begged forgiveness. She had no idea. She just admitted to a state capital offence. And strange enough, John Law, the Halifax peddler, is actually about to forgive her. And the whole story would have ended there. But not his son Abraham. "Oh no, we'll have you for this. I'm going to go and get magistrates." And in doing so, he opened what we now call the 1612 Pendle Witch Trials. The local magistrate for the Forest of Pendle was called Roger Nowell. He had his book of demonology, which the king had written, of course. He was fully aware of the king's paranoia, but he also knew if he could incriminate this young girl, he is going to curry favour with none other than the King of England personally. And that's exactly what he did do. Shall I continue, Justin, or do you want to ask some questions? Or
I'm enraptured, to be honest. I'm enjoying it as much as everybody else is, I've got to say. I mean, straight away from the outset, you know, this whole description of the man losing feelings sounds very much like a stroke.
Yes.
You know, and is that, I mean, I suppose this is the times before people realize what a stroke actually was. You know,
agreed.
I mean,
yeah.
And do you, I mean, as you've kind of obviously went into this particular case, did you have your own similar kind of thoughts as you're reading these kind of accounts?
Well, the only book we've got, Justin, is called The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire, written by a chap called Thomas Potts. And I shall continue the story and bring Thomas Potts in right now.
Do it. I'm loving it.
Okie dokie. So we go back to the old Greyhound Inn. Young Alison has burst into tears and she's begged forgiveness. But John Law's son Abraham has gone to see the local magistrate, and the magistrate has Alison arrested. She's brought to a place called Reed Hall, Burnley, a little village just outside Burnley. And there, for the second time inside 24 hours, she begs and begs forgiveness. She has no idea. She's just admitted to a state capital offence of witchcraft. But she gave Roger Nowell a lot more information. My grandmother, Demdike, she's a witch. So's Bessie Chattox and her daughter Anne Redfern. We have familiars. Familiars, said Roger Nowell. What's a familiar? Dogs, sir. We have 4 dogs, sir. Tib, Ball, Fancy, and Dandy. These dogs came to the fores at different hours of our lives. Demdike, Chattox, myself, and my brother James. And the dogs talked to us. They said we can give you special powers, but in return, we need to suckle from your flesh and take your souls. The dogs also tell us, sir, to make clay pictures. Clay pictures? What's a clay picture? Said the local magistrate. Sir, they are dolls made of clay, but with human hair and human teeth that we have taken from corpses at New Church Cemetery, sir. The dogs then tell us to crumble the clay picture over the fire, and people die, sir. Well, Roger Nowell wasn't scared. He was actually delighted. He knew he was going to curry favour with the King of England personally. So therefore, he gave orders to the sheriffs of the forest, 2 men called Hargreaves and Proctor, to arrest Demdike, Chattox, and Redfern. They are arrested, and they are brought to Reed Hall, Burnley, where young Alison is also under arrest. And they sit round a table, and Roger Nowell interviews them. Now, there's no love between Demdike and Chattox. In fact, a hatred. In fact, Demdike is convinced that Chattox has murdered her husband, and also convinced that Chattox has broken into their little cottage called Malkin Tower and stolen an item of clothing and a bag of meal. So Demdike decides to blame Chattox for the whole thing. And Chattox decides to blame her for everything. The blame goes on the table twice and comes back twice. But in doing so, the 4 of them unwittingly admit to the state capital offence of witchcraft. They are sent from Reed Hall, Burnley, to the city of Lancaster, where they are thrown into what we call the Well Tower. It's a very, very deep, deep underground dungeon. As you walk down the steps of the Well Tower, the light behind you fades, and you find yourself in complete darkness. They are chained to the floor, and these women will have to wait for 4 months on a starvation diet, lying in their own waste in complete darkness until they see daylight again. In the meantime, in the forest of Pendle, at the little cottage called Malkin Tower, Elizabeth Device is very worried about her daughter Alison Device, and she's very worried about her mother Demdike. And she organises what has gone down in history as the Good Friday meeting, where all these other so-called witches gathered in the forest of Pendle at the little cottage called Malkin Tower. It must have looked a bit like a Shakespeare play, as Alison's brother James slaughtered the sheep from the fell and roasted the sheep. They dined on fresh mutton. They got a large cooking vessel called a cauldron and lit a fire beneath the cauldron, and the black saper liquid inside began to bubble and steam. And into that black bubbling liquid went crushed, powdered human teeth. We are told the odd clay picture, and we are told the odd human scalp. The whole idea of this Good Friday meeting, apparently, was to get a potion together to blow the gates of Lancaster City Castle open and rescue their loved ones. But nothing happened. What did happen is word reached the ears of Roger Nowell, the local magistrate. He was furious. "I want these people arrested immediately!" When word filtered into the forest of Pendle of imminent arrests, 3 people thought, hey, there's no way we're going to hang around. Christopher Howgate, his wife Barbara, and Isabel Sigroves, they left the area and made their way to the West Riding of Yorkshire. And in doing so, they saved their lives. The ones that were successfully arrested from being at the Good Friday meeting were Jeanette Preston of Gisborne, West Yorkshire, Catherine Hewitt of the market town of Combe, Elizabeth Device, James Device, Jeanette Device of Malkin Tower, Margaret Pearson of the little village of Padiham, along with John and Jane Bulcock, a mother and son from the village of Blacko, and the biggest star of all of them, Alice Nutter of Roughly. They are all sent to Lancaster with the exception of the 2 Jeanettes. Firstly, Jeanette Preston comes from Gisborne, West Yorkshire. So she is sent to the city of York. She is paraded in front of the York City magistrates. Her husband goes with her, relatives go with her, and villagers go with her, and they beg for her release. The judges in York look a little bit sheepish when they tell her husband, I'm sorry, the king has signed her death warrant, but she won't get a fair trial. The king's word is final, he was told, and of course it was. She is accused of the murder of her employer, Mr. Thomas Lister. Thomas Lister was 33 years of age, a very, very wealthy man, and his home is still there to this very day. It's a Grade 1 listed building. It's a beautiful building from that period of time, early 17th century. Now, Jeanette Preston is nursing him. He has a very high temperature. Remember, there's no drugs available for that period of time. She's mopping his brow to keep his temperature down. He may have typhoid, he may have cholera, he could have scarlet fever, but he has such a high temperature, he shouts, "You're a witch! You're cursing me, lass! You're a witch!" Thomas Lister died that night. Jeanette Preston washed his body clean and wrapped the body in a white sheet, ready for burial. 2 days before the burial, she touched the sheeting and some fresh blood came for the sheet. This was classed as witchcraft. And the jury in the city of York had no alternative but to find her guilty, also under the king's recommendation. And she became the very, very first of the Pendle witches to be executed in the city of York on the 27th of July, 1612, at a very, very famous place in the city called Whatmar Gate. Whatmar Gate, the bottom of the shambles. And at this very, very day, as you walk down that street, you can almost hear the tortured souls of those poor women who all succumbed to the 17th century witchcraft horrors of that period of time. The other Jeanette, she's the little girl, the youngest of the Device family, whilst her grandmother Demdike, her mother Elizabeth, her brother James and sister Alison have been sent to Lancaster. She's been sent to live with the local magistrate, Roger Noel. For the first time in her life, she has 3 meals a day, nice clothes to wear, and a lovely warm bed to sleep in. She has never known such luxury. She has no idea, but she is going to play a very, very important role in the prosecution of her entire family and all those people I've just mentioned. Roger Noel is delighted. He writes to the king personally, and the king writes a letter back to him. Mr. Noel, sir, I'd like to congratulate you on your successful arrest of these evil, wicked women. I'm going to send 2 circuit judges from London, James Altham, Edmund Bromley, and a young lad called Thomas Potts. And that's why we're here today, because in 1613, Thomas is going to write a book called The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire, which will earn him rather a lot of money, actually. It is the only eyewitness account we have of the whole of the trials. From reading it quite a few times myself, it does seem to be rather biased towards women. So we have James Altham, City of London, Edmund Bromley, City of London, and Roger Noel, City of London. The king said if he could meet those 3 to Roger Noel, and Roger Noel chose 2 other magistrates, Mr. Nicholas Bannister of Barrowford and Mr. William Holden of the town of Burnley. The jury are all male, and the prosecution is all male, because in 1612, women were treated as second-class citizens. There's no 2 ways about it. The trials at Lancaster attracted a huge amount of attention. A huge amount of attention. You can imagine the jury must have been quite horrified at the stories that were going to come out, really. The trials began on the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th of August, 1612. Demdike has defied the law to the very, very end. She has died in the well tower at Lancaster City Castle. She's over 85 years old. She's been on a starvation diet, and conditions down there are not at all pleasant. Who is going to testify against her? None other than her own granddaughter, the little girl Jeanette Device, who's been living with the local magistrate. She's brought into the court wearing a lovely white dress, a beautiful white bonnet, white shoes, and Roger Noel, the local magistrate, picks her up and puts her on top of the desk so the jury can see her. And she starts to tell the jury about these dogs, Tib, Ball, Fancy, Dandy, and how the dogs had suckled from Demdike and Chattox's flesh, how they'd told them to fashion clay pictures. Her own mother was in the court, and she shouted, "Jeanette, stop it! Stop it! You don't know what you're saying. Have my mother removed from the court. She's upsetting me." And her mother was taken downstairs. Well, Demdike has died, so who's going to testify against none other than Jeanette? And she's accused of the murder of Rafe Asherton of the village of Downham. She's accused of the murder of Richard Baldwin of Burnley, and she's accused of the murder of Henry Mitten of Rough Lee. According to Potts's book, The Wonderful Discovery, she was practically blind, 85 years of age. She would link arms with her granddaughter, Alison, and they'd make their way around all the pathways of inside the forest of Pendle, and they would go begging. All those three people they begged off, and they refused to give them any money or indeed any food. And they all died sometime after they'd had confrontations, in some cases 2 years afterwards, but it was classed as witchcraft. And the little girl on the table, Jeanette, told the court how her grandmother was definitely responsible for the deaths of those three people. The next person brought up from the cells was Bessie Chattox, commonly known as Anne Whittle. She was not a pleasant sight to look at. Through no fault of her own, she'd been lying in her own waste in the well tower. The aroma in court, according to Potts's book, was not at all pleasant, really. She's in a state of health which is not very, very good, really, probably covered in lice and other funguses, etc. The little girl on the table made sure that she was indeed going to be found guilty. She is accused of the murder by witchcraft of John Devise, the murder by witchcraft of Hugh and Anne Moore, and Anne and Robert Nutter, having a dog called Fancy that gave her special powers. And the little girl on the table said, "I've seen this dog, sir, actually bite under her left arm, take blood from her, and drink the blood, sir." Of course, Chattox is in such a bad state of health, she just accepts that she is going to lose her life. Her daughter is brought in next, and that's Anne Redfern. Anne has been found guilty of helping her mother in the murder of Robert Nutter. She makes a plea of not guilty, but the little girl on the table tells the court how she'd seen her at the Good Friday meeting, and that sealed her fate. The next person brought into court is none other than young Alison Devise, where the whole story started from, and she sees her own sister standing on the table. And in court, she looked around and saw John Law, the Halifax peddler. And James Orton, the senior judge, said, "Could you please release the curse that you've put on Mr. Law?" "I can't, sir. Only my grandmother can do that, sir. And she is dead, sir." And that sealed her fate. But her own sister, little Jeanette, confirmed her story to be true. Then came James Devise. Now, James was in such a bad state of health that two warders had to hold him up. He was lapsing in and out of consciousness. In fact, the jury wondered whether the lad had been tortured. His face was black and blue. He was certainly very, very ill. So ill that he admitted to witchcraft. He admitted to the murder of Anne Townley of Townley Hall, Burnley. He had stolen a pie from a window ledge that was just cooling down, ran down the driveway of Townley Hall, and Anne Townley had rushed after him. He'd had a confrontation with her. He hit her, and sadly he lost the pie. But she died 3 years later. This was classed as witchcraft. She was found guilty of the murder of John Duckworth of Clitheroe because he had promised him a shirt that never materialised, and also the murder of two twin brothers, Hugh and Blaise Hargreaves of Goldshaw Boo, the little village. He is so ill, to it, but his own sister on the table, Jeanette, confirms his story, and he tells the jury, if you go to Malkin Tower and start digging, you will find clay pictures. According to Potts's book, The Wonderful Discovery, these clay pictures were brought into court and used as evidence against them. Then came the mother, Elizabeth Devise, not a pleasant sight to look at by all accounts. They called her Squinting Lizzie. She was blind in one eye looked up, one eye looked down, and she looked like a typical fairy tale witch, really. She's, again, very ill, like the rest of them. But her own daughter confirms that she was at the Good Friday meeting and that she indeed, in fact, organised it, but is also guilty of the murder of John and Josh Robinson by witchcraft. She's in such a state of shock, she just doesn't even answer the court, and is found guilty on the evidence of her own daughter. Then came Catherine Hewitt from the town of Cone. Catherine had a nickname like Demdike and Chattox. They called her Mould Heels. By all accounts, she's quite a tough woman, really. Now, she had a confrontation with an exceptionally wealthy woman in the town of Cone called Anne Foulds. Anne Foulds had a beautiful white horse. She came from quite a wealthy background, and if she didn't like someone, she would actually horsewhip them from the horse. She picked on Catherine Hewitt. Hewitt dragged her off the horse, gave her a good hiding, and she died 2 years later. This was classed as witchcraft. The little girl on the table, little Jeanette, always confirmed that she was at the Good Friday meeting, which sealed her fate. But this is where the story takes a very, very sinister and sad twist, really. In court that day, many historians believe were three people that really should not have been there. John and Jane Bulcock, they're a mother and son, they're farmers, and they farm the land known as Blacko, very, very near the Bay Horse Inn that you were the other day, Jason. Working farmers. Now, the land was owned by an exceptionally wealthy lady called Alice Nutter. Alice's home is still there to this very, very day. It's called Roughly Old Hall, Grade 1 listed building, probably worth a fortune today, actually. Her problem is that she's lost her husband, and he, of course, would extract rents and offer the local farmers rents, which was the only income, but quite a lot of income, really. And when he died, Alice took over the business, but she didn't realise that women weren't allowed to. But John and Jane went to see her, and they said, Mistress Nutter, someone has been stealing our cattle. Someone has been pushing our fencing back and removing our stone walls, etc. And she said, well, don't worry. I'll go and have a word with the local magistrate, Roger Noel. So Alice went to Reed Hall, Burnley, the home of the magistrate, but because she was a woman, he refused to see her. She was furious. I've got to get this land dispute sorted. So therefore, she went over Roger Noel's head and made her way to the city of Lancaster. And there she met the senior magistrates. But as she walked into the court there, she heard the words, "It's a woman! A woman! Get her out! A woman! Get her out!" She grabbed hold of the furniture, would not let go of her grip. And the judges in Lancaster, well, let her have her say. In one day, she won her land disputes fairly and squarely. But as she left Lancaster, she had no idea she'd made a real enemy of Roger Noel. He was furious because the senior magistrates actually reprimanded him for not doing his job properly. He thought, I need to get rid of this woman. How? He had the trump card up his sleeve. The little girl, Jeanette Device, still standing on the table. And he said in front of the jury, Jeanette, these people were here, John and Jane Bulcock, Alice Nutter, were they at your home, Malkin Tower, on Good Friday, Forest of Pendle? They were, sir. A look of shock and horror came across John and Jane and Alice's face as they realised, on the evidence of a little girl, they're being found guilty of witchcraft. Now, the senior judge, James Altham, was a little bit concerned because he realised that Alice was actually quite a clever woman and couldn't work out why she was there. And he said, look, can we just mix some more prisoners and have an identity parade? But little Jeanette pointed all three out again. And in the case of John and Jane Bulcock, they were found guilty of the murder of Jean Mead of Harrogate by turning her completely insane. In the case of Alice Nutter, she's found guilty of aiding Demdike and Alison Device in the murder of Henry Mitten of Roughly because he wouldn't give them a penny. In court, she said, sir, I don't need to beg. I'm a woman of wealth and I don't know these people. But the little girl on the table had sealed her fate, and they joined the rest of the cells down there. They made their way to a place known as the pillory. They had their hands tied behind their backs, and these poor unfortunate people made their way to the gallows. They stopped and turned and climbed onto what we call the pillory. They stood on top of trestles. The head governor, Thomas Cavell, had the duty of kicking the trestles out from underneath them. As each trestle was kicked away, there was a roar that would have made any modern football club rather proud, actually. This was classed as entertainment. Watching that day is the little girl, Jeanette Device. She's holding the hand of the local magistrate. She watches Her family died by strangulation. She watches the landowners die, the inhabitants of Cone die. And as soon as they all stopped twitching on the pillory, Noah said, "Goodbye. Surely, sir, I'm going back to that lovely warm house of yours, sir. Goodbye." He had used her. She made the long, long journey through the forest of Bowland into the forest of Pendle to a cold and empty cottage, knowing full well that her evidence had claimed the lives of all those people I just mentioned. We do know that she survived because 3 years later she's rearrested on a charge of witchcraft. She must have been quite a tough young girl, really. A young lad called Edmund Robinson of the market town of Cone said he'd been walking through the forest of Pendle and seen her commit acts of witchcraft. Of course, the family reputation it's taken seriously. She is arrested and sent to Lancaster, stripped naked, and they look for marks on her body. She's then sent to the city of London, stripped naked, and brought back to Lancaster. They couldn't find anything actually wrong with her. And after 3 years of travelling up and down the country, this young boy Robinson said, "Actually, I made it all up. I didn't see her do anything." So witchcraft or the superstition surrounding it absolutely destroyed that family and those poor, unfortunate people deep in the forest of Pendle. But can I just bring in 3 more witches, Justin?
Do it. Of course, of course.
There were 3 young ladies in the next cell: Jane Southworth and Jean and Ellen Brearley. They were very, very fortunate because they came from a gorgeous place called Salsbury Hall near Preston. And Jane Southworth was a very, very privileged young woman. She lived in a wealthy, wealthy background. In April 1612, the King's Commission came to Salsbury Hall. "In the name of the King, we arrest you for witchcraft." Sir Richard said, "My daughter a witch can't be." The 3 of them, Jane Southworth, Jean and Ellen Brearley, who are twin sisters, identical twin sisters, are handcuffed, shackled, and taken straight to the city of Lancaster. They are thrown into what we call the cell next door to the well tower. And on the 20th of August 1612, Jane hears this huge roar outside her window. She climbs onto the shoulders of her 2 friends and looks out of the grill on the cell window itself. And she can see the Pendle Witches making their way to their deaths. She sees them turn, climb on the pillory, and watches Thomas Cavell, the head jailer, kick the trestles out from underneath them. This huge roar goes up, as I mentioned before, and the 2 Brearley girls say, "What's happening, Jane? What's happening? Oh, terrible things are happening. Terrible things are happening." And then there's silence. They then hear the sound of footsteps. A key is placed in their door. The door is opened, and there is Thomas Cavell, the head jailer. Jane recognizes him immediately as the man who's just executed the Pendle Witches. "Right, you 3, just dealt with that lot. Your turn next. Follow me." The 3 of them must have been absolutely terrified as they made their way up the twisting staircase into the same courts that have just dispatched the Pendle Witches. They stand in front of James Altham's City of London, Edmund Bromley's City of London, Thomas Potts' City of London, Roger Nowell, local magistrate for the Forest of Pendle, William Holden, local magistrate for Burnley, and Nicholas Bannister, local magistrate for Barrow Ford. The jury are all male, and indeed the prosecution are all male. These 3 20-year-old girls must have felt terribly isolated in front of such a huge male audience. They bring in another child witness, a little girl called Gracie Sowerbuts. And Gracie is the head gardener's daughter at Salsbury Hall. She is picked up and put on top of the desk, just like little Jeanette was by Roger Nowell. And James Altham said, "Writing lady, read out your testimony against these 3 witches." "I will, sir. I was walking along the banks of the River Ribble, sir. It was a hot summer's day. I saw Jane Southworth, and I also saw the Brearley sisters swimming in the river, sir. It was actually a hot summer's day. I then saw these unusual dogs. I have never seen the breed before, sir. Long backs, cloven hooves, very long tails. They jumped into the river, materialized into human beings. They picked up all 3 women. They danced in a circle. They paired off for a meal, and then watched in the distance as fraternization was taking place with these demonic spectres. On the 2nd day, Ellen Brearley came to see me. Sir, she changed from a woman into a dog, and she tried to suffocate me under a blanket of straw, but I escaped. On the third day, the three of them came to see me. They said, Gracie, would you like to have a bit of fun? Fun? What fun? A little boy has just been born at Salsbury Hall called Thomas Walshman. So? He hasn't been christened. So? We'd like to drink his blood. No, no, said Gracie, I don't want to do that. James Alter picked up the gavel. We find you, you shall die like the rest this morning. Before the gavel came down, his companion, Edmund Bromley, the other City of London judge, said, No, 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 no. Let her finish her testimony. Sir, in the dead of night, the three of them made their way upstairs to the long gallery at Salsbury Hall, sir, where the little Welshman boy was sleeping. Over 3 nights, they took him from his cot. They pricked his stomach, they drank his blood, and he died, sir, was interred at Salsbury Church. In the early hours of the morning, sir, the three of them went back. They dug up the coffin. They took the child from the coffin. They boiled the baby's flesh. They ate the flesh, but kept some body fats that would enable them to change shape. That was it. James Alton was furious. We find you guilty. You shall die like the rest this morning. Before the gavel came down for the second time, Jane pulled off a miracle. Sir, I beg of you, sir, to cross-examine this young girl, sir. She has been manipulated by a Catholic priest hiding at Salsbury Hall, sir, to falsely incriminate me and my 2 friends, sir. Please cross-examine her. That one word, Catholicism, made the judges sit back. Are you an Anglican, you say? Yes, sir. I'm married into the Southwark family. They've never liked me, sir, because of my Anglican views. This young girl, sir, has been deliberately manipulated to falsely incriminate me and my 2 friends, sir. Please cross-examine her. Well, the court was quite shocked. That word Catholicism seemed to ring around the whole courtroom. They took Grace next door. Jane, Jean, and Ellen waited. Would they join the Pendle Witches, or would they somehow be reprieved? The tension must have been unbearable for these 3 young 20-year-old girls, really. The court was finally reassembled, and James Alton stood up. In the light of new evidence, we find you, James Southworth, you, Jean, and Ellen Brayley, innocent of the crimes against you. You're free to go. The 3 of them hugged each other. They jumped for joy. As Sir Richard came to pick them up to take them back to Salsbury Hall, Jane turned and looked back at Lancaster City Castle. She could see the Pendle Witches hanging and blowing in the wind. From the pillory, at the end of the pillory, Jane noted 3 empty nooses. She realised she'd not only saved her life, but the lives of her 2 best friends, Jean and Ellen Brayley. But the story doesn't really end there. They went back to Salsbury Hall, had the party of all parties. But for many, many years, even nowadays, I've been to tourism seminars where I've seen Pendle Witch authors nearly come to blows over this story. The only book we have got, of course, is Potts's book, The Wonderful Discovery. However, in 1909, a huge answer was, answered when 2 local doctors made their way to the beautiful village of Worley, not too far from Clitheroe. Dr. Whitaker and Dr. Dawson. And they took Potts's book, The Wonderful Discovery, with them. And they read it from the front page to the back page. And that's when Whitaker had a brainwave. I've got it. I believe Grace Salbert was telling the truth. How? The way she described those 3 dogs in the River Ribble sound a bit like Tib, Ball, Fancy, dogs belong to Demdike Chattocks and Redfern. Remember, she would not have been in court that day. She described them perfectly. But also, let's contact York Minster and get permission to exhume the Walshman grave. They contacted the Reverend John Franks at York, and he agreed to meet them at Salsbury Church on this bitterly cold December day in 1909. Snow on the floor, if you will. He met the 2 gentlemen there and went into the church, and they got the grave records, and the Reverend Frank started to pace up and down the snowy cemetery. There, gentlemen, that's where you should start digging there. Whitaker and Dawson started to dig. Just 2 feet beneath the surface, they located a lozenge-shaped 1612 coffin in remarkably good condition due to the clay soils in the area. Under Church of England supervision, it was opened and found to contain nothing. It seems that young Gracie may just have been telling the truth. We shall never, ever know. And there, Justin, sorry, we have the Pendle Witch story. Thank you very much.
That is amazing, absolutely amazing, and yeah, absolutely, you deserve a drink after that. I've just been absolutely enraptured by that, and I'm sure everybody listening has just thoroughly enjoyed all of that, and it is just an incredible story. It is ridiculous in places. The whole idea of the fact that when somebody dies 3 years later, that's seen as witchcraft. It just beggars belief. But the one thing I just did want to say, I will move on to people's questions if they have questions for you in a second. But I left your talk roughly, having listened to that, really angry actually, because of something that happened even more recently. Was basically people were trying to get the Pendle Witches pardoned, and they set off a petition. And just want to say a little bit about what the outcome of that was, because it really did anger me, I've got to say.
Yes, that's quite correct, Justin. In 2012, of course, we had the 400th anniversary of this tragic event, really. And myself, Visit England, Marketing Lancashire, Pendleborough Council got together. We thought we need to do something for Alice. And we got enough money together to unveil a statue to her in the village of Roughly. But we insisted her back was facing Lancaster. She's in chains and has a look of real innocence because, in all fairness, from reading Potter's book, she lost her life nothing to do with witchcraft, but the fact she was a woman who had a brain that she wasn't allowed to use. Now, in the town of Burnley, you have Morehouse's Brewery. It's a fantastic brewery, and they have a lot of Pendle Witch ales. And the managing director had a great idea to get a petition together to pardon the Pendle Witches. We got 12,000 signatures. I was one of them, of course, and this was sent to the Home Office in London to a gentleman called Jack Straw, who was indeed the Home Secretary. And we got a very nasty response saying, these people are enemies of the state as found guilty by King James's courts, Lancaster, 12th of August, 1612. Enemies of the state? So they are convicted witches, and to this very day, classed as enemies of the state. What I can tell you is every Halloween, Pendle Hill looks more like Wembley Stadium, because we get thousands and thousands of people all over the world, all over the country, that will go to Pendle Hill in the hope they will find a Pendle Witch. Tomorrow, I've got a coach tour from a local hotel, and I've got about 48 people on that tour, and I shall take them to all those villages that we've just mentioned. And it's a story I never tire of, but because it's so well documented. But there's a lot of mystery still shrouding Thomas Potts and the King, etc. And indeed Roger Nowell, the local magistrate. Because I do know that James Altham was knighted, Edmund Bromley was knighted, Roger Nowell was knighted and made the High Sheriff of Lancashire. And of course, Thomas Potts wrote his book, which even now is an international best-selling book, because it's the only eyewitness account we've actually got, Justin. Yeah,
it is. I mean, it is. I mean, I like I said, I left really quite cross that Jack Straw did not pardon the Pendle Witches. I just find that, and the fact that they still regard them as enemies of the state just beggars belief in my view. But anyway, just go on to a couple of questions, because I say it was just mesmerized by that. So thank you so much for that. I just absolutely loved it. I'm trying to find the question that was asked a long time ago by Side Eye Guy, who's one of our viewers, but I can't find this question. But basically, he was asking about, you see plenty of people going over to Pendle Hill and thinking it's haunted, and there's some kind of reputation of it being a haunted location and looking out for trying to contact the witches and things. What's your view on all of this mythology surrounding Pendle Hill?
Well, if you look at Halloween, everyone associates Halloween with witches, don't they, really? Because they are convicted witches under British law, it has brought a lot of attention. I mean, I will not lie to you, Justin. I've taken many paranormal groups like Haunted Happenings, Dusk Till Dawn, Bump in the Night, and other American, Canadian film crews up to Malkin Tower at night time, and they do bring in their own mediums. But there is an atmosphere there, really. And if viewers would like to go into Google search and just put the White Witch of Pendle, you'll see the last piece of snow melting on the side of Pendle Hill, the last piece of snow melting in the perfect shape of a witch on a broomstick. I almost feel as if the tortured spirits of these poor people are crying out for justice. In particular, Alice Nutter, who's this noble woman who lost her life and well, basically murdered by the courts that day, if you will, as indeed they all were, really. But the statue that we unveiled to Alice has become very, very much a symbol of female rights. And
Yeah.
I put Alice in the same league as the magnificent Emmeline Pankhurst, the fantastic Edith Cavell, and the brilliant Grace Darling. She was an exceptionally brave woman, and as she made her way to the gallows that day, she must have known that she was a totally innocent person.
Absolutely. Question here from Lou. She's saying, "Hi Simon, hope that he is healing. When I was at the Bay Horse, you spoke about Jack Straw refusing the pardon. I recall another attempt being made to pardon them, but was unsuccessful. Is it basically?" She's saying, "Is it worth trying again?"
I believe there is. I've never actually met this person. She's an author, and I think she's writing a book on the Pendle Witches. There's been so many books on the Pendle Witches written, and a lot of authors tend to mix fiction with non-fiction, which of course is okay. But the only book we have got is Pops's book because he was there in 1612. He's the only eyewitness account, really. But I believe this author, she is very, very seriously trying to get another petition up, which I will gladly sign. But whether that's
absolutely, I think nearly every single person watching this would sign that as well, to be honest. Gareth saying, "Is that skull in the Golden Fleece at York one of the Pendle Witches? Do you know of this?"
I've not actually seen that. I've been in the Golden Fleece on many occasions. I know it's haunted by a Canadian airman, actually, the name of Neil McCarty, who sadly lost his life there, 1941. But we do know that Jeanette Preston was actually executed in the city of York. She's known as the Yorkshire Witch. So therefore, it may be. I personally don't know. So I'm not really qualified to answer that question. But Jeanette Preston certainly lost her life in the shambles. Whitmar Watmergate, 27th of July, 1612. There are some brilliant artifacts in York down that very, very street, including the hand of Margaret Clitheroe, who was another Catholic martyr, and she was found guilty of looking like a Catholic priest and attending an illegal Catholic mass. Now, of course, priests would be hung, drawn, and quartered, a barbaric and painful death. In the case of women, you were pressed to death, and they would put a large door on you and then put weights on top of the door. And she lost her life also at Whitmar Watmergate, Margaret Clitheroe. Her body was then thrown, I believe, on a tip, if you will, but her hand was removed, and that's at the Bar Covenant School, Catholic school in York, and they say it has healing properties.
Can I just say, for the memberships, can I just say huge thank you to Mike and to Kaza and to Belfast Crafty for donating memberships. I thoroughly just so appreciate it. Thank you so much. Question here from Brian saying, in America, witches were burnt due to the bread that they stored getting mold, which led to hallucinations. Where do you think the witch concept came from? Where did it come from in the UK?
Well, again, it's really King James, isn't it, really? I mean, this man's absolutely paranoid, isn't he? He not only believes that witches exist, he believes they're actually out there to get him. And of course, he was a Scot. And in Scotland, the witchcraft craze started a lot earlier than in England, really. But it was just pure paranoia, really. That's the only way I can describe it, actually. I do know the Salem Witch Trials. The Salem Witch Trials are very, very famous, extremely famous, because it was, again, under British rule. Before 1781, of course, America was a British colony. And I do believe at the Salem Witch Trials in Massachusetts, they brought in another child witness, and they based that trial on the Pendle Witch Trial under British law.
Wow. Reach Beyond Paranormal is just asking you how, obviously you do get lots of ghost walks and linked with the paranormal as well, but have you ever had any paranormal experiences yourself, Simon?
The only time I've had, oh gosh, it's an incredible story. This was spooky, I swear to you. I'll be very, very quick. I'll try and condense this for you. I mean, I do believe in the paranormal. I do, but I'm not a psychic. I'm not a medium. But way back in 1960, I was just 5 years old, and my dad bought this beautiful house in South Cumbria. And I remember getting the Pickford's vehicle, arriving there, and seeing this gorgeous three-story house. And I fell in love with it right away. And I thought, how lucky am I, even at 5 years old, to live in the English Lake District with these beautiful mountains behind the house, and you could actually see Lake Windermere about 4 miles away. Because I was only 5 years old, my sister was 2, brother was 8. Mum and Dad made our beds very, very quickly, and we fell into a deep sleep. Mum and Dad carried on working till the early hours of the morning, moving furniture around the new house, etc., taking crockery out, and they made their bed up around 1 o'clock in the morning. Because it was a country house, the last thing they needed to do was put up any curtains, and bright moonlight was coming into the bedroom. My dad turned over, the door opened in the bedroom as he heard little footsteps, and he thought it's either me or my sister. But in came a liver and white cocker spaniel, and he thought, how's that got in here? He got out of bed to touch the dog's collar, to take it downstairs again. His hand went straight through it. He thought, no, I'll try again. His hand went through the dog for the second time. The dog then turned and looked at the window as if its name was being called. It then faded away. My father was in a state of shock. He'd seen something very, very paranormal. My mother was in a deep sleep at the time, and she woke up with a jolt. Oh, I had a strange dream. It's clear as day. There's a man outside the house in Victorian clothing with a dog lead in his hand, pointing up at the window. They put 2 and 2 together. They never told me until I was 15 years old. In that period of time, I grew to love the house very much indeed. Birthdays, Christmases, and living in the Lake District is an honour. It really is an honour. When my dad sold the house in 1973, it broke my heart. See that door close the last time and leave that such a gorgeous house. But this is where the story gets even better. Some 9 years ago, my wife and I went on a P&O cruise in the Mediterranean. I'd never been on one before, thoroughly enjoyed it. You had what's called black tie events on this vessel called the Oceana. Yep. I went downstairs, had a dicky bow tie on, dinner jacket, sat down, enjoyed a very nice meal, and just 2 tables away was a young lady who kept smiling at me, and I thought, I really cannot be that good looking. As it happened, Justin, she knew me. She was a lovely girl called Louise, and she lived very near where I live in Lancashire. So it's Simon, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Hey, I've been in your coach tours. I quite like your stories. Ever thought about doing a PowerPoint show on a vessel like this? And I thought, well, would people like witches, ghosts, murders? You'd be surprised, Simon. I'm going to give you an email address when you get back to England. And I said to my wife, we might get a free cruise out of this one. So got back to England and I applied. Within 3 days, I got an audition. I could have gone to Surrey or to Cumbria. Now, Lancashire and Cumbria are very close, so it was a no-brainer. I was given a telephone number of a lady called Maureen. I contacted her. She said, Simon, my house is rather hard to find. It's in South Lakes. Well, I know South Lakeland. I used to live there. Oh, you won't find my place. It's really hard, actually. I'll give you a sat-nav code. She gave me the sat-nav code, and I set off to the city of Lancaster, through Lancaster, right at the A6 towards Pendle. And I went past my old primary school, then past my old secondary modern school, over a beautiful limestone road with forestation either side called Heavisham Head, which I knew very well. Down the bottom, turn left, and straight back to the house my dad had sold. It seems that Maureen, the cruise director, had actually bought the house. So when I got there, I looked up like I had done in 1960, this beautiful 3-story limestone building. Went inside, and she said, come on, Sam, we need to get this audition done. You look a bit jaded. What's the problem? Well, I know you won't believe this one, but I used to live here. No, she said. On my laptop, I did have some photographs to prove this, really. And she said, okay, let's have a cup of tea. I sat down in the front room. The last time I'd been there, I was 15 years old. Looked at the familiar doorknobs. I looked at the familiar fireplace and the mosaic on the fireplace itself. She then came up with a tray of tea, and I can still see the pot steaming away there, sugar, milk, 2 sauces, etc. And I just happened to mention the dog, the liver and white cocker spaniel. Her eyes lit up. She dropped the tray. I can still see the tea spilling across the carpet and sugar and milk everywhere. She nearly hyperventilated and she said, "Oh, Simon, my brother lives in London. Every Christmas he spends Christmas with us. The very first Christmas, he'd have had what would have been your mother and father's bedroom upstairs. He came down Christmas morning, saying, in the early hours of the morning, the door opened, and in came a liver and white cocker spaniel dog. I looked at the ceiling. My dad had died in 1982. I just said, thank you, Dad. That has confirmed your story. So, yes, I do believe in the paranormal. And yes, I do believe in ghosts. But I've never seen one, to answer your question.
That's fantastic. I'm aware that we've gone over the hour, but I just want to, I don't know, but I'll do a couple of last little questions if that's okay. One from my brother, just very quickly, was saying, why do you think he got so uptight about witches? Apparently, he was well read and highly intelligent. So, did you have any kind of theories about why he was particularly so uptight about witchcraft and witches and the supernatural?
He believed that witchcraft stopped his wife Anne of Denmark getting from Denmark to Scotland to marry him. And he also blamed the gunpowder plot on witchcraft. He, of course, was an ardent Protestant, and he hated the Catholics with a vengeance and believed that Catholicism and witchcraft were allied. That's why he hated them so much. Of course, it's pure superstition, but in those days, it would have been taken very, very seriously.
Yeah. Collie Crazy is saying, am I right in thinking there was monetary incentive to find people guilty of witchcraft? I thought I'd read that somewhere. And I don't know if it's about Witchfinder General type territory, but
Matthew Hopkins, definitely. Yes, he made a lot of money out of it. Hopkins was a little bit later, Braintree, Essex, I believe. And he had a pretty nasty way of torturing young girls and women. He had what's called the witching stick, which was basically a cane with a retractable blade. And if it touched human flesh, it would retract inside the stick, which gave the impression it was entering flesh. And he'd go, look, there's no blood. And look, she's not even screaming. Well, I can't feel anything. You're a witch. You're a witch. He was an evil man. There's no two ways about it. Matthew Hopkins, a very evil person.
Brian's asking, he's a bit perplexed by the talking dog in these cases. Was this witnessed by third parties or was it just made up, do you think?
That's a very good question. We do know that after the trials at Lancaster, these dogs just seem to disappear. That's a very good question. For all we know, those dogs could have been fabricated by the actual jury, fabricated by the prosecution, fabricated by, who knows, even Thomas Potts. But yes, those dogs did disappear. They did disappear, which also does put a bit of doubt on the case, doesn't it, really?
I mean, I like I said, I know that everyone who's watching this is just thoroughly enjoyed your talk, just absolutely loved it. I mean, there are so many books. If you're interested in the Pendle Witch Trials, there are so many books out there, some amazing ones. I mean, I've got a couple. There's this one, which, oops, how I can see that. There we go. Pendle Witch Trials 1612 by Rachel Heisted. Very small book, quite thin, quite easy to read. It's quite straightforward. This is a great book, Tracy Borman's Witches, James I and the English Witch Hunts. That's a general good book overall to give you a feeling of what was going on at the time. Do you have a particular kind of favorite books or references or things like that you think has been particularly good about not just Pendle, but any other things which you would highly recommend, Simon?
Well, I had a very good friend at Lancaster City Castle called Christine Goodyear, and she's written an excellent book, but she's used Potts's material, which is a lot easier to read, actually. She's made it easy accessible to the actual trial and indeed the curses and indeed the accusations, etc. Christine's book is just simply Pendle Witch Trials 1612. But again, at the end of the day, we've only really got Thomas Potts's book. He was there, we weren't there. And it's really hard sometimes to try and imagine what life was really like in the 17th century, living in a small stone cottage, away from society, living off.
And I think there's as well. I mean, I suppose obviously there were many witch trials, over a period of a couple of hundred years. Is it essentially that we know of the Pendle Witch Trials simply because of Potts's writing, because it was so well documented? Is that what sets it apart from others, do you think?
Yes, it does indeed, because it's the only material we have on the actual trial. That's why it's so famous. That's why the Pendle Witch story is so famous, because of this eyewitness account. But we've got to rely on that book being honest and truthful. But as one of your last viewers mentioned, were these dogs actually fabricated? Was the little girl Jeanette Devise, when she was staying with the local magistrate, was she groomed by him? Was she groomed to give false information? What we do know is the poor girl was cast aside as soon as the trials finished. And her evidence, of course, claimed the lives of her entire family and all those people that were accused of witchcraft.
Just one couple last questions there. One from Lou saying, Cry of Innocence, a fictional book, rings pretty true to Alice Nutter's fate. Is it pretty much based on truth, do you think?
I think it is. That's a very, very good book, by the way. The Cry of Innocence, yeah. And that's a very apt word, isn't it, really? As I say, I've been to Malkin Tower in the early hours of the morning with paranormal groups. They do bring their mediums in. And the word Cry of Innocence does seem to come forward quite often. But along with the Pendle Witch, of course, we have, sadly, Allied air crews that lost their lives on Pendle Hill. And I've got an exceptionally good friend called Kevin Bruff, who's one of the finest mediums I've ever met, actually. And I've been with him on a few occasions with his firm, Out of This World Paranormal. And he has picked up on these characters, which is quite amazing, really. I do believe that some people do have skills, and Kevin is certainly one of them.
Absolutely. And I think we need to finish just by promoting the hell out of your work and your tour guides and everything else, because if anybody's been enraptured by your talk tonight as much as I have, I'm sure they'll desperately love to find out more about you, Simon, what you're doing, where you're going to be, what you're going to be in terms of what's coming up next. So
yeah, sure.
Promote away.
I do conduct on a regular basis Pendle Witch tours, and they all start from the aptly called shop in Clitheroe called the Cackling Witch. The Cackling Witch Clitheroe. And they take all the bookings. All I do is wait for the minibus to arrive, climb on, and then take people into the Pendle Witch region. I do have a book called Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected, and that's on Amazon. And one lady did mention, Simon, you should do an audio book. Well, I'm halfway through recording one, really, but I'm looking forward to having that released pretty soon. But just
absolutely,
a huge thank you.
Everybody listening to you will go, well, I think there was a couple of comments going, this guy needs an audio book. It's just so good. So the fact that if that's on the cards, I think that's going to be a wonderful thing to have, which is, in terms of having you read an audio talk, an audio book around, would it be around the Pendle Witches, do you think, or about Lancashire generally?
There are so many good stories out there, so many good stories, Justin. And I find by far the best way is to talk to local people. When I first started my ghost walks, I was invited by tourism officers to various towns, etc. And we always found that the best way would be to put an ad in the local newspaper. Then people would come and see me. But you could always tell when someone's being very honest and very truthful with a ghost, like my own father was, of course. And I'm a collector of ghostly tales. And you can always, I must come back on the show sometime with you, Justin, and relay some
You are more than welcome. I tell you now, I think tonight will probably be one of the most popular podcasts I've actually done, I would say, because first of all, it's just been the magic of your voice and telling the tales and me not having to say very much at all. So I think people are generally really loving that. Not chipping in with every question every 2 seconds. So it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, Simon. You are more than welcome to come on whenever you're free. So I'm taking bookings from January. So, if you've got anything coming forward into the new year, then let me know and I'll absolutely have you on again. And it can be about any area you wish.
Well, I think we should do some really good ghostly tales next time. Some really nice ones, some juicy ones.
Oh, yeah, of course. Absolutely. Just a huge thank you. Please do think about following Simon on social media. Is an absolute wonderful chat. If you want to find out about his tours, go and like I say, Simon Entwistle on Facebook. And And obviously, is there any other ways other than Facebook that people can get hold of you?
I find Facebook is one of the best ways, really, to be honest with you. I do have my own name, Simon Entwistle, on Facebook, but also I've got what's called Top Hat Tours. Top Hat Tours on Facebook, and I put on there all the tours that are coming up, etc. But if you'd like to book onto a Pendle Witch tour, then do contact the Cackling Witch shop in Clitheroe, and they too are on Facebook. That's the Cackling Witch.
Brilliant. There you go. You heard it. Get on there. You know, if you're in the UK and you live anywhere close to Lancashire, even if you don't live close to Lancashire, bloody drive up there. It's a gorgeous area. It's a beautiful part of the world, and so you'll be thoroughly entertained by Simon. And yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much this evening, Simon. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And then, like I said, enjoy the rest of your evening. But absolutely, I'll definitely get you booked in for some more ghost stories. I think it'd be wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right. Quick chat to you guys, first of all, before I disappear this evening. Thank you again so much for the memberships. I really, really do appreciate it. It helps the channel so much. You've got no idea. I hope you've thoroughly enjoyed it. Please hit like, please subscribe, please share this around if you think you've got other people who will enjoy Simon's tales as well, as much as I have and as much as you have this evening. One thing I'll just say, next Monday, I've got Don't Scare Claire. I'm going to be chatting to Claire for the hour, but also because I did not do a stream, I didn't do a Chips Tea Party stream over Halloween. Just too busy, too much going on. So I'm going to be doing two. So I'm going to be doing one this Thursday and another one next Thursday to make up for it. So you're going to see a lot of me. And I'll always have lots more things for you guys to talk about, discuss, and mull over and debate and stuff like that. Yeah, thank you so much this evening, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure just listening to Simon, and I'm sure you'll agree he's been an absolutely wonderful guest this evening. So Don't Scare Claire will be next Monday. All right, guys. Phew. I shall see you on Thursday. All right. Good night.